Good evening, folks, and welcome to Common Sense. Tonight we have First Selectman Bob Burke and his running mate, Bill Slifkin, who's the chairman of the, he's the vice chairman of the Board of Finance in Bethel. And once again, we are going to discuss town issues, election issues, and continue this long discussion to try and educate the voters and the viewers out there in terms of what the differences are between Mr. Burke and Mr. Slifkin and their candidacy, and their opponents, who are the Democrat Knickerbocker and Straighten, and the Republican Krabus and Sadkowski. Now, guys, we have a lot of ground to cover in the next 4 or 5 weeks. The election season is about to heat up. And one thing that I think is extremely important is for the voters to understand that there's a huge difference between you two guys and what you've done and your opponents. Mr. Knickerbocker, you know, for voters who haven't been in town that long, they may not realize that Mr. Knickerbocker has supported every budget increase that's ever been, you know, presented or passed across his desk. He's literally, in the last 10 or 12 years, supported every single budget increase. The man cannot and has, as his public record demonstrates, never been able to say no to a budget increase. Any comment on your part?
Well, he in particular with the school side of economics and the way our budgets run, he always wants more. His comment in public has been several times, the state gives us $8 million a year. It's time for the townspeople to come up with more.
Now, why is that a disaster? I mean, a potential disaster for the taxpayers of Bethel.
If you have paid attention to the last year of our economic crisis throughout the world, it's a huge problem. Bethel receives $8 million a year from the state of Connecticut because we're not the most affluent town in Fairfield County. There's none of our neighbors except for Danbury receive more in state aid on the educational sharing than the town of Bethel does. And that's because we don't have the per capita income that our neighbors have. Our per capita income in the town of Bethel does not surpass $30,000 per individual at this point, where you have towns like Ridgefield where their per capita income is $50,000. Reading is well over $40,000, and our closest neighbor, who receives about $2 million in educational sharing, a similar community in population, not in area makeup or size, we're only 17 square miles, but is Brookfield, and they only receive $2 million.
So what's the point?
Well, the point is, our people don't have that extra money, and we have to watch how we do handle our money, and you can't just tax these people, especially in these economic times. We had a minus on the town side of the budget this year. We were minus 0.73. I tried to get 1% off last year's. Now, you didn't lose services. Everything is just as good as it was last year, if not better. The only thing that happened to us is we were a little late paving in Stony Hill because in June and May we had 23 inches of rain, so I couldn't get the paving started. But Payne Road's paved, Hawleyville Road's paved, Vale Road's paved, and we're starting to walk down. We're going to do Chimney Drive. We're going to walk right down Benedict into Walnut Hill and pave from the Old Town up to the bend in the road. So your phase 3 of the sewer is going to be taken care of. Now, you have to let that sewer paving set for a year. The backside of Walnut Hill, Weed Road, that won't be paved until next year. And if they pave it ahead of that, you're wasting your money. Plus, all these roads need to be reclaimed. We're going right down 12 inches depth and reclaiming all the roads.
So what you're saying is that one of the reasons that the roads weren't magically repaved this summer was because there's a process involved in doing it correctly. Do it once, do it right.
Exactly. And you had 2 months of rain, and before that, Lord knows, in December, I called joint meetings of the Board of Finance with Mr. Slifkin, the Board of Education, with Mr. Knickerbocker and Mr. Krabus. We informed them that we were $1.5 million behind in revenue. And that does not mean that the people aren't paying their taxes. It means that we're not selling hunting licenses, we're not selling dog licenses, we're not selling...
not selling homes.
Yeah, not selling homes. So your conveyance tax is way off. It's been okay. okay. We've had a good month of July, we've had a good month of August, and September's been okay.
Both Mr.
But it's nowhere near back. You know, in boom times, a conveyance tax, you sell in your town, you convey $100 million in excise tax. Half of that stays with the town. Not $100 million in real estate sales. Your excise tax is 0.5% of $100 million.
So what I'm hearing is that you're far more sensitive to the taxpayers' ability to pay.
Exactly.
During these hard times.
Exactly.
Than your
Let me
opponents.
give you a prime example. Augustina Homes. For years, the state abated their rent. They gave them a credit that we gave to the Augustina Homes. And the Diocese of Bridgeport abated their rent. 3 years ago, the state stopped doing that. I did not stop giving the abatement to Augustina Homes. My administration continued to give that to the people at Augustina. They need it most of anybody. This year, we are unable to abate the Augustina because we're $1.5 million behind in revenue in December. So we couldn't abate that this year going into the new year.
So you're saying that the financial challenges that
They're
lie
huge.
ahead for the next administration, the next 2 years,
They're
are
huge.
And by huge, what you're really saying is that there's a broad spectrum of possibilities where if you don't watch out, you're going to wind up wasting money.
Let me give you an example. Downtown, we have gas look-alike. They're electronic, but gas look-like street lights. We have trees that were planted. We have a cobblestone simulated sidewalk situation. It's beautiful.
Right.
It's beautiful. It's been in for over 10 years. Start looking at the light poles. They need to be painted. That has never been in a budget. We have to do something to get them painted. They're steel. They're cast iron. They're going to rust. Now, what do you think they're going to look like when they start rusting?
Well, they're going to look horrible.
Yeah. So there's a maintenance factor with everything. Our buildings, we've got 20-some-odd buildings in this community. Everybody's, you know, the prime ones are the 5 schools. But we have over 20 buildings. They all have to be maintained. There's a huge amount of maintenance there.
Your opponents are talking about, you know, increasing the maintenance schedules and things of that nature.
How are they going to pay for
As
it?
they're talking about it, I'm thinking.
How are they going to pay for it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's an issue because, frankly, you've been able to do a lot with limited
Less.
funds. Absolutely.
Let me give you a prime example. The Board of Finance appropriated money to put energy-efficient windows in our town hall. I did it. But I've been in office 4 years. It was appropriated under the Hutchison administration. Never did a thing. By the time it came time to put them in, and I did it, we were $70,000 short because of escalation. The sewer project.
So how'd you get it done? Did you have to come up with the extra $70,000?
We had to come up with an additional $70,000.
Right.
But rather than wait, I did 3 sides of the building and held off and didn't do 1 side.
So there's one
Went
side.
back to the people and said, I need another $70,000 to the Board of Finance.
Yep.
And in their wisdom, they said, well, you know, you got 3 sides done, you got to do the 4th. So they appropriated, and we took out a capital non-reoccurring, and that's where it came from and where we paid for it out of, and that would be funded by the taxpayer. Capital non-reoccurring is funded every year by the taxpayer, so when you have a problem, example, having to paint all the lights in Bethel, that's probably where I think it'd come from. If you need a fire truck, that's where that may come from. If we need, and we just bought a new Peterbilt truck for the town. I mean, everybody was at that town meeting, so they know exactly what happened.
Something that's coming up next year is most of the labor contracts in the next 2 years are going to have to be renegotiated.
In the next 2 years, they
or up
all
for
are due.
renegotiation. What happens if you have someone that is inexperienced negotiating those contracts?
Well, I've negotiated several times. I negotiated all the contracts you presently have.
Right.
We have 4 labor groups on the town side. I think you got 3 or 4 on the school side. I have never been invited to go there. The Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools does not come under the jurisdiction of the first selectman. But they do come under the authority of the top of the chain, and that's the taxpayer, the voter, the residents, the people of Bethel.
Can an inexperienced leader negotiate those labor contracts
No.
without caving in?
No.
What happens?
They're clueless as to what the job is, how it's done, and what the payback, what's needed. So you'll have a serious problem. I got in, and we hadn't had contracts in some cases for almost 2 years. The police were out almost 2 years.
Did you experience political pressures during those negotiations that you had to resist?
Absolutely.
What happens if you have someone like Matt Knickerbocker or Larry Krabus come in?
What's happened with Matt Knickerbocker when it comes to the administration of the school over the last 10 years?
Yeah, he's clearly influenced by the...
Well, he does what he's told to by the superintendent, instead of the superintendent doing what he's told to by the Board of Education.
And that's a major concern that the voters have articulated lately, and that is that both of these candidates are Board of Ed members, and they're clearly far more sensitive to the needs of the Board of Ed than they are to the needs of the greater town.
Well, if you look at the spending increases that they proposed on last year's budget, you can see that. They proposed 2.4 and then 1.6, and, you know, the voters said, no, that's too much. They're going to get it back at 0, and that's what we went through.
See, but my concern is this. If they have a history of catering to the Board of Education system and the Board of Ed lobby, and they're entitled to do that, you know, as Board of Ed members they can do that. What happens when they're in the office of the first selectman and you've got your Board of Ed that wants that 2 or 3 or 4% increase?
The Board of Education represents 3,000 people.
Right.
The town of Bethel is almost 19,000.
But what happens when they want 4% and they are beholden to the Board of Ed, and yet the town also has needs? You can't feed both without a double-digit tax increase.
The
Who loses in that scenario?
the only protection that the taxpayer has at this point is what this administration gave them, and that's a split budget.
Right, and the automatic
because
referendum.
they can put that 6-7% increase into their Board of Education, and it has to stand on its own.
Yeah, but here's my concern. I've been around long enough, and you guys have too, where you've seen Matt Knickerbocker sell budget increases. You've seen him spin budget proposals to the point where if he's first selectman, you know what's going to happen?
You'll get spun.
He's going to sell the budget.
He'll spin you so much you'll be dizzy.
So much. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but
in the last 4 years, you haven't had that. The last 4 years, what have you done?
I present the truth to the people, I educate them, I keep them informed, and I let them vote. And then whatever they decide, I do.
Right, and that's a luxury that the town taxpayers have had the last 4 years.
We'll find out if they respect it
There hasn't been any
this election.
Exactly. Well,
in this election, you'll find out if they respect it.
Well, I'm concerned that they need to understand who your opponents are and what they represent. Because we know what you represent.
They can be run by the Democratic Town Committee of 35 people or the Republican Town Committee of 25 with 10 alternates. That's how the hierarchy is set up, and I won't cater to those. I've been a Democrat, I've been a Republican. I'm from Bethel. I care about the people of Bethel. I believe that excellent government starts at a local level on your green. The reason the New England towns through history have had their green, their common areas, the area where nobody's cow roamed, it was there for the people to meet, congregate, and discuss before the sun went down or right after the sun came up. That's common areas. We have it on our front lawn of our town hall. We have it over at our Doughboy Monument. We have it at the Libby Kellogg Monument. Places where people can congregate to discuss the betterment and the government of the local community, which then can get sent to Hartford. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Right. Talk about splitting the budget. 2 years ago, you and I were on the Charter Revision Commission. We proposed splitting the budget. You obviously wanted it split as well. It's been split. The voters by, by a large margin, 500
marvelously.
votes, voted to split the budget. But here's my concern. 2 years ago, who opposed splitting the budget?
Matthew Knickerbocker.
And why? Why did he?
Because
why do you think he opposed it?
he did not want the people to have the authority. 20 years ago, the Democratic Party opposed the automatic referendum. You realize that's 20
Yeah,
years?
it's 20 years ago, 1989.
You go to a town
Before
meeting,
that, you couldn't,
and you get 200 people
Right, and they
that
could
represent
railroad
19,000.
and they could railroad it.
You
And
could
the
handle
same
it?
thing happens now. You go to a town meeting, it's all the employees, and it's all the pro-spending lobby that
Right.
populate the town meetings.
Exactly.
If we relied on a town meeting, our budget increases would have been double-digit for the last 20 years. But because of the automatic referendum, where the people, the power of the people, decide.
Bethel is unique to all our neighbors. We have the split budget, we have the automatic referendum, and we continue to go to referendums. Some towns, Monroe, a couple other towns, you go out to referendum one time. It doesn't pass, it comes back, council may do it, the Board of Selectmen may do it. That's how your budget gets set.
But isn't that a major difference between what you guys represent and what your opponents
I
represent?
represent democracy.
You represent the power of the people. In your particular world, the electors in the organizational chart of the town are at the top
Democracy.
of the organizational chart.
Yeah.
And if you
Democracy.
look at your annual report, people, if you've ever looked at an annual report that the Bethel town government produces, and they produce one every year, that organizational chart will show the electors at the top of that organizational chart. Now, your opponents, their attitude is that the electors are at the bottom of that organizational chart, not at the top. And that's how they act. They act as if the taxpayers serve the town government. In your world, you serve the
When you bring
taxpayers.
sheep to the slaughter, you put a bell on a goat, and those sheep follow the goat right into the slaughterhouse.
Right.
All right? If that's what you want, well, you have the opportunity to vote for that. I have two opponents that they'll take you there.
Right.
I prefer not to take you to the slaughterhouse. I prefer to take you to the pasture and let you graze happily.
Now, Bill, we haven't had a chance to let you talk about things. With respect to the high school renovation, which you were involved in on a day-to-day basis, there was over $300,000 in expenditures that you guys had to make.
$333,000, I think $821.
That were not budgeted in.
We had, when we started out, we knew that we had certain repairs to make before we even start the renovation.
Right.
A prime example was the roof. That turned out to be a little over $85,000 that we had to spend before we could even renovate. And, you know, we heard things like, well, don't worry about the roof, it only leaks when it rains, you know, things like that. So we had to...
Yeah, but things like that, Bill, please tell them this. That came from the Director of Facility
I
Management.
was about to do that.
Okay, let him.
Another thing that we did, we spent about, I think it's about $36,000 repairing the boilers in the high school. Not the and the valves, because they were all leaking.
Backflow preventer.
And it was quite an enterprise that we had to do. And with all the other things that we had to do, it was well over $300,000 that we had to spend of the taxpayers' money because the maintenance was not done.
So these were repairs to the actual high school.
That's right.
That were not budgeted in the renovation, that
Now,
you literally had to find the money
Now,
to.
one of the things that came out of that was good, we now have a roofing contract that takes care of every roof in the town. And that's for a minimal amount of maintenance every year, and that's at Bob's direction with our help. And we have Silktown Roofing that monitors the school under the direction of the Public Works Department, and the roofs are now okay.
Right.
But that came out of what we picked up in the high school.
But yet, isn't it a fact that the Board of Ed currently is demanding the return of the 460 account, the maintenance account, the maintenance of the school?
Absolutely, and that would be the worst thing that could ever happen
Why are
to
they
this
doing
town.
that? With what you just told me,
It's
with the
all about
level of
control.
disrepair and the history of poor maintenance of the school buildings, why on earth would they want control of that $370,000?
Because it represents anywhere from $350 to $400. When I came into office, the 460 account was close to $500,000. At this point, we're operating at $350,000, and we're getting everything done.
And it's under the direction of the Public Works Department.
It's exactly.
So they
and
want.
I've had total resistance. I'll show you the emails that have been sent to my Public Works Director by the Superintendent of Schools that tells people not to communicate with them.
Folks, I hope you're listening to this, because these are the details, the behind-the-scene details that you need to be aware of if you're watching the show before you decide who you're going to vote for. And I hope you decide to vote for Burke and Slifkin. Why? Because in these times, the last thing we need is change if it's not broken, okay? Don't get sold on that concept. If it's not broken, there's no need to fix it, okay? Let's move on here. Now, Bill, I know that your top priority on the Board of Finance, and if you're elected a selectman, would be to continue watching the tax dollars. Can you comment on that a little more?
Everybody I talk to is concerned about taxes. That's the only thing they talk about.
That's the #1 issue.
Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4.
Why is that, Bill? Tell us why.
Because people can't afford it.
Right.
In this day and age, in this recession, there is no way that they can afford 4, 5, 6, 7% tax increase. They're just struggling to pay their bills and feed their children.
What percentage of the town do you think is in that situation that have medium to high impact?
I'd say somewhere 70, 75% of the
You think
town.
it's that high?
Yes, I do.
That have had a definite, that have been impacted by
Everybody
this
I
recession?
spoke to, it's definite. It's that kind.
Right. Well, so with that being a prevailing issue, wouldn't it be safe to say that it's the economy stupid? I mean, you know,
Well,
that,
not
that is the
only
issue.
that, I don't hear our opponents talking about the $1.4 million in debt
Right.
that we're going to start
Oh, they're
with
dancing
next
all
year.
around that.
They're
dancing.
ignoring it.
They're dancing that one.
They're ignoring it.
Right.
Mr.
Why is-
Knickerbocker said very clearly, what good does it do to have a good bond rating? What good does it have to have a good savings account, our general fund? What good does that do us if we don't use it?
So they want to use that.
That's what
They
he
wanna
said when
use that rainy day
when
fund.
he was trying. They'll use that in a heartbeat.
Look at the
I
other-
put $1 million in there.
Look at the other towns that have taken money out.
They got
And
trouble.
They have real financial trouble
Yeah.
right now. They can't bond anything.
And yet, isn't it true that Mr. Knickerbocker is actually advocating, and we thought this died, advocating the sale of Terre Haute?
Can you imagine that? That is the stupidest thing that anybody can do. You
400
own 400 acres up there. 400 acres we own up there in the Danbury side with our reservoirs, and 207 of the Terre Haute property was purchased back in the 70s. That wise people move forward to have that's an ace in the hole. You don't know what's up there. I know what's up there. I know the resources that are up there. And that is not something to let go. But that is something to have and to hold. Do not put conservation easements on it. Conserve it, but don't put conservation easements on it.
Why is that? Tell the voters why.
Because it's too you put a conservation easement on that where it can never be used for anything except conservation, and the price of your land just went from some $100,000 an acre, $70,000 to $100,000 an acre. It goes down to about $12,000 an acre.
It's the same thing, isn't it? Blue Jay Orchards, for example, they put that for sale about 6 years ago.
$4 million.
They were looking for $4 million, 120 some odd acres
Right.
for $4 million.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because it had a conservation easement on
Right.
it. And
Well, it
had a park,
cannot
a
be built
recreation.
on. It has to be a farm.
You
Absolutely
can't
right.
sell that for $2 million.
Right.
That's ludicrous.
And that's what they want, $2
Yeah.
million. And-
Mrs. Hutchison tried to, if I didn't get elected, she would have let that go for $750,000. The city of Danbury, from a private owner, bought 3 acres down the road from our Terre Haute property, 3 acres, and paid $210,000 for it, and put a conservation easement on it. God bless them. They want to spend the money for that, and they did it 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the economic climate was a lot different.
But what's really revealing about this whole scenario is why do they want to sell Terre Haute? Why do they want the $2 million
So
or
they
whatever
can
they
take
they
$2
can
million,
get
put it in the general fund, and spend it.
and spend it? That's it.
Once you spend it, the land has been there since 1977. That's 30 years we've taken care of that land.
So their focus isn't about saving money or
No.
cutting
It's about spending,
expenditures,
selling,
bringing in more revenue so they can spend more.
spending, selling, get a new car,
Right.
get a new pair of shoes.
I've
whatever
noticed,
you're gonna
I've
get.
watched both of their shows, and I've heard both sides say something, the same exact thing. What's your plan to cut, or, you know, to keep the taxes down? We're going to bring in more revenue.
How are you going
That's
to
a
bring
kiss of
in
death right
revenue?
there. In this economy, how are you going to bring in more revenue? But more importantly, how about this, guys? If your answer to cutting taxes is bringing in more revenue, what are you really saying to the voters out there?
You're gonna increase
What you're
your
really
spending.
saying is that you
Gonna
want to
spend.
spend more money and you need more
Absolutely.
money. It's not about, because you can't cut the taxes unless you cut the spending. One goes with the other.
I want to develop a revenue source, and I've spent 4 years trying to put it in an area where it's commercial, or it's something to the effect like the Toll Brothers situation is being done up on the Worcester Street Hills, which is age-restricted. All right, and you've got to watch that because you can't go past a certain level of age restricted. You can't have your whole community be age restricted. Look at Southbury. Southbury is a marvelous example of a residential industry. You've got Heritage Village over there. Those people pay a lot of tax to the town, and they don't take much out.
Services, exactly. No kids, so forth and so on.
Exactly.
Listen, let's end the show. We've got 2 minutes left. You're getting, you know, they're going to come after you for one thing, and one thing only. They're trying to make an issue out of this proposed transfer station. And what they apparently don't realize is that the transfer station is losing money.
The transfer station loses hundreds of thousands of dollars every year.
And your
idea, the taxpayer subsidizes it, yet we pay $30 for a permit, and we pay 16 cents a pound. We pay the highest transfer station fees of anybody.
And this is important. What's the benefit if that transfer station were privatized?
You go from a $300,000 deficit to a $200,000 revenue source. That's a $500,000 swing, a $500,000 swing.
And how does that benefit the users?
They won't have to pay a thing.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
So in other words, they would literally...
We will recycle more. We will get... Right now, our recycling, and we're committed to HRRA till 1914, 1915, where we have to bring our source there. But plastic bottles, that can be sold. That's a petroleum product.
Right.
Demolition can be sold. And I'm not talking about doing it out in the open air. I'm not talking about a facility like in Danbury. I'm talking about the RFP that I've put out. The RFP that I put out is for totally enclosed, filtered. The rail car comes in, it gets loaded inside a building, it goes out.
Oh, it's right next to the rail.
Right next to the rail. We have a transfer station. Bethel, Connecticut is one of the few towns in the state of Connecticut, other than the city of Danbury doesn't have a transfer station.
Middle of town.
Mr. Galante has a transfer station. And the federal government has taken that, so they have a transfer station. The city of Danbury is trying to buy that transfer station because it's a money-making proposition.
We're running out of time, but it sounds like what you've discovered is that we've got a gold mine, and you're looking to try and mine it.
Absolutely.
Okay, folks.
They'll make all kinds of comments about killing lizards.
Sure this will get elevated, and we'll talk some more about it. Folks, continue watching us. We've got a live show on October 28th, a one-hour live show. For Common Sense, good night. See you next Friday, 7:30. Be there. Bye.